In November, when deer season rolled around in Arkansas, my family and I would go to our hunting cabin close to Mina. My great-grandpa had constructed the house in 1984, and while it's a little old today, it served our needs well. 2 years ago, my friends Cody and Austin joined me at the cabin for a preseason hunt called muzzle load hunting. We were scouting an area about a mile away from the cabin for deer signs because we were thinking about setting up a stand near there. As we wandered around, we came across a pile of rocks in the woods. Upon closer inspection, I realized it was a grave belonging to a man named Ed Crane. We weren't too concerned, we just took a few pictures, and after we found a good spot for a stand, we returned to the cabin. Cody made an effort to learn more about Ed Crane via research, but he didn't uncover many results. 3 weeks we're back at the cabin for the official modern gun season this time. It's just Austin and I. We were sitting in the cabin discussing where we should go for opening day, and I decided I would try out the stand we had previously put up during muzzle loading season. Austin went about 1.5 miles the other direction towards a small lake off the property to hunt. I left the cabin around 4:45 a.m. because I had about 1.5 miles walk and wanted plenty of time to walk slow and get to the stand before daylight. This isn't a national forest and you cannot drive any vehicles into the hunting trails. We split up at the end of the road, me going left towards the stand and Austin going the opposite direction. It was a normal walk. For the most part, I've been in these woods since I was 9 years. After finishing my walk, I quietly made my way to the stand, taking care not to disturb any nearby deer. As the sun began to rise, I couldn't help but glance over to my right, where we had previously discovered a grave. It was about 30 yards away, partially concealed by the surrounding brush, and I could barely make out the mound of rocks through the foliage. I felt a sudden surge of excitement as I shook the stand and whipped my head around in a circle, but nothing had moved in the left side of my vision. I turned on my headlamp and scanned my surroundings for 5 or 6 minutes, but still couldn't see anything. Then I reached for my handheld radio and asked Austin if he was close by. I'm used to seeing movement first thing in the morning when hunting. I got no response. I continued calling in on the radio while looking back and forth for the next 20 minutes. Daylight was approaching, and after chalking it up to being in my head, I finally started to calm down. The sun rose up over the trees, burning off the thin layer of fog that was covering the woods. This is around 7 a.m. Now I had almost forgotten about the incident when I heard it again, this time "Hey Caleb." He was in the same whisper-typey scream as before. This time it was enough. I grabbed my bag and gun so fast I accidentally left the hand radio on the seat beside me in the stand. I climbed down the ladder so fast I almost slipped off. I hit the ground and speed. Walked all the way back to the cabin, peering over my back. Every 10 to 20 steps I opened the cabin door, and Austin was nowhere to be seen. He was still hunting when Austin finally did return to the cabin. He was confused. He kept asking if that was me. Screaming into the radio, I explained to him my experience, and I explained. I never screamed. His radio was clipped to his belt while he was standing in the doorway, trying to make sense of what had happened. And right as we were talking about it, his radio began to make an incoherent, screeching noise. Not static, but an organic sound, like an animal's. We listened carefully and kept the radio close by for the remainder of the day, but it never happened again. Later that week, we returned with our other friend Cody, and I searched the stand and the ground around it for my radio, but it was nowhere to be found. Needless to say, we no longer hunt in that spot or anywhere past the gate, because of the absolutely bizarre and inexplicable experience. It was a cold December night. I was hanging out with a few friends, Todd and Tristan. We were bored and had nothing to do. So one of us came up with the idea of going to the nearby train station platform to take some pictures and goof off the platform. Isn't far from our houses. When we got there, we started taking pictures of the Leal space we found ourselves in. After hanging out there for a little while, it started getting even colder and we were hungry. So we started to head to our car. The path back takes us on a long footbridge across a canal. We spent some time on the bridge joking around and taking more pictures. The mood could not have been better. But the cold was getting to us, so we started back on our way, Again, the bridge was not wide enough for the three of us to walk side to side. I was walking in front, Todd and Tristan behind me. We were joking and chatting as we walked. Tristan said something funny and I turned still, walking and laughing at what he said when I noticed a man walking just feet behind Tristan. He looked to be in his late 30s. His face was dirty, and he was wearing a black and white plaid shirt and ball cap. His arms were down at his sides, in one hand was a cigarette, and in the other was a large kitchen knife, clear as day. My blood ran cold when I saw it. I quickly spun back around, pretending I hadn't seen him for some reason. I thought that was the best thing to do. My fire flight kicked in and I found myself speed walking to the end of the bridge. I hoped that my friends would catch on and match my pace. I glanced back at them to check, and thankfully they were right on my tail. But the man was too. He was now so close that an outsider would have thought he was part of our group. He stepped off the bridge and took a path going to the right. My friend, still having no idea the man was even back there, fearing I was about to need to defend myself. I held my tripod up like an axe. The man seemed to get the memo and took the path to the left. We walked a little bit further before I pointed him out to Todd, and I gave him a quick rundown of the situation we almost found ourselves in. Walking backwards, we watched the man disappear into the darkness and we hurried back to the car. We drove to the nearest gas station where we got food and talked it over. The whole situation was just a weird story, up until a few days ago when I was checking the pictures I had taken that night. This picture shows Todd under a light on the station platform, but just beyond the light, almost behind a freight car, is the silhouette of the man. The picture was taken at least 30 minutes before the situation on the bridge, meaning he was watching us, waiting for us to put the cameras down and turn our backs. Just when you think things can't get any worse, they do. The thought of how different things might have turned out gives me the willies. After getting married, my husband and I bought a house in a small town in North Carolina. Unfortunately, the area was known as a military town, so it wasn't exactly a safe place to live. One night, we even heard gunshots down the street. Nevertheless, due to his job, he was often gone for training operations and worked nights when he wasn't traveling. I spent most of my time alone at home because I was a full-time college student, so I made sure to study and do homework whenever he wasn't available. One night, as I was writing an essay, my dog Simba and I were lying in bed, and we both heard what sounded like rustling coming from above our heads. Simba, a pit bull mix, despite people's misconceptions about these dogs, is actually quite small and has never acted this way before. I texted my husband, who agreed, and said he would contact pest control the next day to spare me the trouble of setting traps and bait. 2 days later, pest control came and did what I thought was a thorough inspection of the house. They found evidence of mice and roaches in the attic, so they laid big baits and sealed some entry points in our home. However, for the next week, the rustling noises became increasingly loud and frequent, especially at night. Simba would freak out every time I heard them, and at one point, his hair would literally stand on end. This really freaked me out. I called my husband, who reassured me that it was the mice and that they were just making Simba nervous. That night, as I was about to fall asleep, he confirmed it. I thought I heard footsteps from above, but since my dog did hear it, I thought I was just psyching myself out, being home alone. So often I did have some anxiety, especially at nighttime, because I didn't feel safe without my husband home the next day. I slept in pretty late and had woken up with a fever, so I wasn't feeling great. I got up to let Simba outside. The layout of the house was odd. You had to go into the garage to open the backyard door, and the entrance to the attic was right above it. As I was walking to the door, I felt like I was going to vomit. Not because I was sick, but because the door had a huge dirty handprints on it and a bunch of smudges from the inside. Someone had been in there. I assumed someone had broken in through the garage in the middle of the night, so I took a picture of. I texted my husband to tell him what was going on while I waited for the police, but unfortunately he couldn't respond until later. Due to work, the police came in just a few minutes since their station was right down the street. I showed them the handprints and how I couldn't understand how someone broke in because I would have heard the garage door opening. Then I realized that maybe the rustling I was hearing wasn't mice, and that the footstep I heard was actually a person. I told this to the police, and they immediately checked the attic. It turned out some guy who lived with his family down the street from us was a meth addict and he had been avoiding staying at his family's house. And so he had snuck into our garage when I was gone one day and had been living up there for a little over a week. Somehow pest control had missed him because he was hiding behind a bunch of boxes. Apparently the inspector was not as thorough as I had hoped. Our Ring security system never even picked the guy up on camera entering our home. So he must have entered another way. Thankfully, we no longer live in that house or area, and despite this happening a few years ago, I still get scared being home alone at night for any amount of time. I'm just thankful nobody got hurt.